So welcome everyone to our session today. My name's Christy Spire. I'm the team leader of nature education here at Green Adelaide, and I'd like to start this afternoon's session by acknowledging country. And I always go to my next slide to do that, and it sticks because all you lovely people have entered in. So I would just like to do that in language, Ngadlu Tampanti, Ngadlu Ghana, Yatanga Imparenti. So that means that we acknowledge that we're meeting on Ghana land today or above Ghana land. I'm 4 stories up high in the air, and acknowledging all the places that you are coming from today. So thanks for joining us for this 5th instalment of our seminar series for 2024. This is our 2nd year of doing these, and we're running them to help share the great work happening around Adelaide to make it cooler, greener, wilder and more climate resilient. Just a reminder as well that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Green Adelaide YouTube channel. And you can also catch up with all the previous iterations of these as well. So make sure, you catch up and share them with your friends and families. Now, today's session, is being recorded. It's not interactive as such, but you are invited to ask questions through the chat or the Q&A, which MS Teams has popped in now at any time throughout the session, and we'll pull those questions out at the end and chat to Tiahni about them. So as most of you would know, since you've jumped in, today's session is on climate justice with Tiahni Adamson, and I'll just do a little bio for her, and then I'm sure she'll introduce herself and her story a little bit further, which we're really excited to hear about. So Tiahni is actually one of our Green Adelaide board members, but more important than that, she's a proud descendant of the Kaurareg Nations and a leading advocate for Indigenous justice and environmental conservation. She works currently as a community engagement officer at CH4 Global. Go and check out what they do, a climate change solutions company, and has also a business in science communication. Tiahni has a wealth of experience, including pivotal roles with SEED, Australia's First Nations-led youth climate justice group, and as a youth dialogue member for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Tiahni is the Young South Australian of the Year, and you've probably seen her around the place getting accolades for that, which has given her a great platform to share the things that she values and stands for. She also loves playing outside and is very happy for all this beautiful rain that we're getting today and over the next couple of weeks. So today she's going to take us through the interconnectedness of climate justice with concepts such as equality, human rights and historical responsibilities for climate change, as she discusses the pressing needs for an equitable distribution of both the burdens of climate change and the efforts to address it. So although Green Adelaide is very locally focused here, this session today is really about thinking about our global responsibilities as well as our local responsibilities. So thank you so much for your time today, Tiahni, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I will stop sharing my screen and you can start sharing yours, and we'll get into your story. And please ask questions through the chat function as we go along, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christy, and so lovely to see so many people online. Thanks for joining me. I'm thrilled to share story and share space with you all today. So thanks for giving me this grand opportunity. I'm just going to pop this up.
Brilliant.
Christy, can you give me a thumbs up? Yes. You can see it? Amazing.
You can see it. Beautiful.
So a lot of people that would be on this call would be here because they're probably in this space or sector or already caring for country, healing country. They have the onus of this big responsibility of how we work in the climate crisis that we have, inevitable warming from anthropogenic or human-based things. And there is a massive part of this conversation about justice or injustice and the social equities and inequities that come with the climate crisis and with caring for country. So I've got a pretty diverse presentation, and time for questions at the end, as lovely Christy's already said. So please feel free to pop them in the chat. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that this presentation may contain images of people who have passed away. All of these pictures are mine, bar one, which I'll mention. So these are pictures, except for the 2 that I'm in, that I've taken myself on country, working with a variety of First Nations communities, which I have the privilege of doing. So I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Ghana Yata, Ghana country, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's a real honour to be here on beautiful Kaurna country and to be able to work and walk alongside Kaurna people. And I'm also paying respects to any of the other lands that you might be calling on from if you're not from beautiful Kaurna country here. This was a yarning circle that I had the privilege of working with some young year 10s on the Aboriginal Summer School for Excellence in Science and Technology. I've got to come back as a mentor about 6 years after I completed the program myself, which was a program we used to run the year 10 students to get them excited about STEM. And it was a merging of the cultural aspects of science and big connection to identity and who we are as First Nations people, as well as strengthening that through science and technology and how we can operate in these fields to make the world a better place. So that was a really cool project that I got the part of being on. A little bit of a background about myself. This is me a few weeks ago. No, this is me when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was born here in Adelaide on Kaurna country. And then when I was about 5, we moved up to Palm Island, which is in Queensland, off the coast of Townsville. Palm Island is one of the largest Aboriginal communities in Australia. And it originally was a place where First Nations people lived under their own law and flourished and thrived. And then the Australian government, when Australia was colonised or invaded, took different First Nations people from the mainland and put them on Palm Island as criminals, and then put over the Australian governance and LAW, Australian governance law, over the top of Aboriginal LORE law. So it was an interesting place to grow up, lots of differing views and ideals, and a lot of ways that our First Nations people were experiencing a lot of injustice in that space, a lot of police brutality, and a lot of issues from the way that the government sort of created this island after it was flourishing so well. My memory as a young person growing up on Palm Island was very much about waterfalls, bareback horse riding, waru, which is my totem, the sea turtle, were really common and popular, and it was a really common food source while we were living on the island, was to eat sea turtle. Lots of dugong around the place, tropical fish. So I really loved it. My mum was a paramedic and she was a lot more informed about the, I guess, systemic issues that were happening on the island there. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea about my lived experience. I'm not a Boogaman woman or not a traditional owner of the island. My heritage and culture comes from Weyburn or Thursday Island, which is in the Torres Strait. So I'm an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman with my heritage from there. But my lived experience, I didn't grow up on my own country. I lived on Palm Island and then we moved down to the Eyre Peninsula, to Coffin Bay and Port Augusta. And then I came back to Adelaide to do some study, and I haven't left because I've been working, which has been great. So that kind of gives a little bit of a journey about my story and who I've learnt from along my life. And it's always important, this slide to me, to let people know that this story or this narrative that I tell is my own lived experience as a First Nations woman. I don't represent Kaurareg Nation as a whole. I don't represent the views of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Our communities are incredibly diverse. Within our communities, we have different ideas and opinions, the same as non-Indigenous people have. And these views come from my own lived experience and the amazing people that I've had the honour and privilege of working and walking alongside. So this is a really important slide to me, and this is this year's NAIDOC artwork, which was designed by Jeremy Worrell. So you'll see that coming out across July, when NAIDOC Week is a big celebration of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, a great time to celebrate. And this slide for me represents country. And I like to ask, usually when I can get a bit of audience participation, which isn't today, and that's cool, but maybe in your head to reflect about what country means to you. In the Western world, we often hear country being referred to as, you know, Australia, China, different parts of geographic locations. As First Nations people, country is a much more deeper understanding of more than place and geography. Country for me represents the land, the sea and the sky, the waters, fresh and salt, the relationships that I have with people in my life, as well as the relationships that I have with plants and animals. Country is all living things together, the spirituality that we hold and the relationships that we have between that. So an auntie told me a few years ago that human beings are country expressed in a human form. And I really like that way of thinking because it reminds me that we do not own the land owns us. We're a part of this system. And unlike the Western way of being a hierarchical way of thinking where our needs are up the top and everything else is below us, is the fact that we are just another part of this system as important as everything else that lives and breathes. And I think framing that at the start of this presentation gives a really nice basis of the way that we need to value other parts of our environment and uplift knowledges of so many different things. When we talk about climate justice and we talk about humans and climate justice, we know that there's an injustice with the way that we value nature, plants and animals in that space too. So nice things to reflect on, I think. A little bit of a frozen screen, which is cool. So our communities are the worst affected by the climate crisis and are often the ones that contribute the least to it. Yay, there we go, beautiful. Climate change is the biggest current threat facing humanity and the existence of our planet and all living beings that live here, so country in all those different forms. We know that climate change is driven anthropogenically or by humans, and we know that First Nations communities are affected the worst while contributing the least. We also know that since time immemorial, every grain of dirt, animal and plant was nurtured by First Nations communities with intricate care and intention. There's this sort of understanding when we look at history books written by non-Indigenous people that we lived nomadic lifestyles with not much purpose. That was absolutely not the case. Caring for country and land management has always been a really intricate part of First Nations culture and a really important part of how we live within this landscape and how we express ourselves as country in human form. Over the last 235 years, this country has faced massive trauma. And this is just to frame where we're coming from about the justice side of this. So it's a short part of the start, but really important that we know about the history of the land that we're on. We faced massacres, rape, murder, the White Australia policy, dog tagging, slavery, the stolen generations, incarceration, forced removal of children from our families, which still happens today. Culture, language, and law was all seized because non-Indigenous people made it illegal to do so and punished people for practicing and revitalising culture. Mission schools, such as the one that I went to on Palm Island, were places where we weren't allowed to practice our language, our culture, and our law, and we had to speak English and learn a different way of knowing, being, and doing. In this process, care for country by our people was also prevented. Our landscape and our people have been missing long-standing connection to one another, and we're paying the karmic consequences of that now. Our country is super sick and our environment and biodiversity is suffering. Still, the consequences don't affect all equally, and despite the fact that we've faced all of these massive issues in our communities, the divide still keeps growing. Our community members are still suffering and are often left behind in the conversations about climate justice and how we can nurture country. However, it's really important for us to know in these conversations that we're not a charitable cause to mourn for. We are the longest standing, most resilient culture and nation on earth, and we're not the problem in this discussion, we're actually the solution. So a beautiful quote from Zendeth Kes or the Torres Strait, and this photo isn't mine, this was taken by the ABC, such a beautiful photo. Our oceans are rising and so are we. When we speak about sea level rise and we speak about the risk of our coastal communities, Zendeth Kes or the Torres Strait, a lot of our islands are only 1 metre above sea level. Our perspective has lacked in these spaces for all the reasons that I spoke about before, and our perspective is absolutely needed. So I know on this call we have a network full of experts and each of you have a wealth of knowledge, and there's a lot of power within that. To bring in a little bit more understanding of and backing of what I've just been speaking about, I'm just going to play this short video before we get into some more of the nitty-gritty of how we can change the narrative around climate justice and have better solutions for everyone.
All around the world, sea levels are rising, and so are First Nations people.
When our homelands are on fire and our rivers run dry, when sacred sites are desecrated and communities are left behind.
We don't just see the climate crisis, we feel it.
Literally feel the pain in our own bodies when this is happening.
It is our right and our responsibility to look after country. We follow in the footsteps of our ancestors, fighting for country, for culture and our future.
We are Seed Mob, and our movement is growing.
Mining giants are paying politicians to stand in our way, but what we have that they don't is each other. Together, we can change the course of history. It's time for much more than climate action. It's time for climate justice. It's time for everyone, everywhere, to stand up. We are the first scientists, the oldest continuing culture. We've defended Mother Earth for thousands of generations. We've survived every shitstorm that's been thrown at us. We are First Nations. We are trailblazing the path out of this crisis. We know what to do. It's time for you to follow our lead, and together we can build a future worth fighting for. At Seed Mob, we stand shoulder to shoulder with communities on the front lines of fossil fuel extraction and climate impacts. We're mobilising across the country to hold governments and big corporations accountable. We are young, black, deadly warriors, and together we're unstoppable. Will you join us?
Ooh, I don't know why I play that video while I watch it myself, because it always makes me really emotional. Seed Mob are an incredible youth climate justice group that are all First Nations run. And now we have an entire First Nations board. All of our management is First Nations. We used to be a branch of the AYCC, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and now we're completely independent. And I just think that on the backing of talking about country and connection, that beautiful video displays the act of resilience and resistance so well. So I'm really grateful to share that with you all. And if you know a deadly First Nations person under the age of 35, because that's what we call our youth, then chuck them a link to Seed if they're interested in healing country to come and help us fight for climate justice. So this is a photo of my wonderful friend, the back of his head, Cedric Varco, and his son down at Radalang or Port Elliot. And we know that if country is sick, we are also sick. The most recent IPCC report stated that there is more than a 50% chance that global temperature rise will reach or surpass 1.5 degrees by 2040. And under a high emissions world, the world may hit this threshold before 2037. I was speaking with a researcher from University of Melbourne the other day, and he said that we're currently at 1.3 degrees of warming already. So it's a pretty terrifying fate that we're looking at. To put this projected amount of warming into perspective, the last time global temperatures exceeded 2.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels was more than 3 million years ago. This is a quote from the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. Climate change threatens the effective enjoyment of a range of human rights, including those to life, water and sanitation, food, health, housing, self-determination, culture and development. States have a human rights obligation to prevent the foreseeable adverse effects of climate change and ensure that those affected by it, particularly those in vulnerable situations, have access to effective remedies and means of adaptation to enjoy lives of human dignity. So we know that last year in Descendant or the Torres Strait, the United Nations declared that the Australian government's inaction on climate change was a violation of Torres Strait Islanders' human rights, that there was not enough being done to prevent this, and therefore the inequity and the injustice that comes with that. We know our communities in Descendant are not receiving much support. They're looking for seawall funding at the moment, and trying really hard to be able to get seawalls to mitigate the effects of climate change and build those up. And you can look up Torres Strait 8 and support funding seawalls for them at the moment. This is the importance of proper and effective listening, dadiri, and collaboration, because Torres Strait Islanders are asking for their needs of what they know will help them in this crisis. And the Australian government's response has been to build a research centre. We know the data is bad, and we know that we need support, and we need to help our communities that are on the front line with the support that they ask for. One Health is something that's really important to me in this discussion of inequity and injustice or social justice. 3.6 billion people already live in areas highly susceptible to climate change, and bringing in the knowledges of the environment with human health and animal health is a really important way for people who maybe don't value the environment or nature as much to see the way that this huge system integrates together and how big of an issue and problem this is. Despite contributing minimally to global emissions, low-income countries and small island developing states endure the harshest health impacts. And in vulnerable regions, the death rate from extreme weather events in the last decade was 15 times higher than in less vulnerable ones. So climate change is already impacting the health of human beings in a myriad of ways, including by leading to death and illness from increasingly frequent extreme weather events such as heat waves, storms, and floods, the disruptions of food systems, increases in zoonosis or disease that's passed between animals and humans, and food and water and vector-borne diseases, as well as the huge mental health impacts that we have. We know that our young people are really feeling the onus and the pressure of climate change at the moment, and climate grief and climate hopelessness and despair and existentialism around the age of about 14 to 16 or 17 is something that we expect to come from our young people now, which I think is really sad. We need to be able to support our young people to feel that they have the potential to be a part of the solution, to change the inevitable fate, the changing ways of our planet, and to be able to feel hope and passion, and that they're stronger together. So we really need to work with our young people to make sure that they have positivity around their future in this rapidly warming world, inheriting a bit of a, like the video said earlier, a bit of a shitstorm. Furthermore, climate change is undermining many of the social determinants for good health, such as livelihoods, equality, and access to healthcare and social support structures. These climate-sensitive health risks are disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, which include women, children, ethnic minorities, poorer or low socioeconomic communities, migrants or displaced persons, older populations, and those with underlying health conditions. I promise we're going to get positive a minute, just bear with me so that we can really frame about the division and the inequity that we're facing here. In 2020, 98 million more people experienced food insecurity compared to the 1981 to 2010 average. 37% of heat-related deaths to human-induced climate change came from the last 3 years, and heat-related deaths among those over the age of 65 has risen by 70% in 2 decades. The World Health Organization projects 250,000 additional yearly deaths by the 2030s due to climate change impacts on diseases like malaria and coastal flooding. However, modelling changes persist, especially around capturing risks like drought and migration pressures. We know that we're going to have climate refugees, and we're already seeing some of that in the ways that our environment is changing so rapidly that people can't stay on their country and home anymore. And Xendeth Kes, or the Torres Strait, where my ancestry is from, is one of those vulnerable communities. So we really need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, and this is a really critical time for us to be talking about this stuff. So to put it frankly, we're in the middle of a bit of an environment and health shitstorm, coupled with equality disparities that service the wealthy and directly punish or exclude First Nations people, people of colour, people with living with disabilities and mental illness, neurodivergency, people in lower class systems, and people born into poverty, violence, and systems of oppression. And we know that when we look at big systems, that these are really hard class systems to move out of or get out of. with the ways that the systems that we have continue to suppress people into their classes and into their minority groups. When we plan for a better future that nurtures human beings and the environment, we need to look towards regenerative futures. Regeneration aims to restore, renew, and revitalise our natural systems, whereas sustainability operates within the constructs that still damage our Earth, but at a slower rate. So this picture here was a fantastic time for me working with the Nukunu community up towards Port Augusta, and we were doing a cool burn with Victor Stephenson and bringing together a bunch of different people to do some burns. I think it was last year or maybe the year before, but I love this beautiful picture of fire. And Green Adelaide are doing really cool stuff with fire sticks and the burning crew, and I'm really excited to see more cool burns and cultural burns around the Adelaide region to continue to regenerate culture and bring back country and heal the people that work in that space too. This picture here was one that I took when I was working up in Arnhem Land. This is in Yirrawee, or the English colonised name is Millingimby. And this is my yappa or sister weaving the start of a basket, getting a basket going, which is really cool. Decolonise to revitalise is the point of this slide. And in this space of talking about these systems that we have that keep people oppressed, we know that we have inherent colonial wiring, all of us, me, myself, that I need to check myself with constantly, that a lack of education on First Nations culture, customs and law, and inherent biases that we have, that we've been brought up with from not knowing the full history and story. Sorry, there's my dog saying hello. He also says decolonize to revitalize. We have inherent biases and we make assumptions about people and different groups, and we need to smash these biases and we need to smash these assumptions. A story from this photo that I'm always reminded of when I was working up in Yirrawee was that the housing people had some funding left over by the end of financial year, and they came into Yirrawee and started installing air conditioners into the houses up there. And the women were saying, why are you installing air conditioners into our houses? We can deal with the heat up here. We're really used to that. But what we struggle with is we don't have security screens and our locks don't work. We don't have locks to be able to look after our families and to be able to help prevent domestic violence. And this story that triggers from this photo always reminds me again of that really important aspect of consultation, of asking people what they know. People who have lived experiences that are on the ground experiencing these things know how you should, where you should put funding and the projects that are needed, because they're living that story. And it's really important not to come in with, ideas of, well, it's warm up there, so we think that maybe air conditioning would be a great thing, but to actually ask the people on the ground, what are the issues that you're facing? What are the biggest risks? What are the things that you need support with? And how can we do that together? This is a photo with two wonderful men, Uncle Candy Wanganeen and Gary Goldsmith, on Narungga country. And this is about that point before of to listen to and be informed by custodians. That one makes heaps of sense. I don't think I need to talk about that any further, especially with those other examples, but it's really important to yarn and to listen and to understand this 65,000-year-old knowledge system. There is so much knowledge and wisdom that's been passed down with a really resilient culture who have held on to these stories. We also know that in knowledge preservation and translation that our people have been mistreated in terms of sharing their knowledge, and that knowledge being either used against them, or back in the day when Australia was colonised, the settlers or the colonisers would ask for knowledge and would trade tea and sugar and alcohol and blankets for knowledge. And sometimes blankets would be covered, they would wrap dead people with these blankets and gift them to First Nations people, and that passed on lots of diseases and wiped out a huge amount of our population. And that was an intentional process of colonisation to reduce the number of First Nations people on our country. So when we talk about sharing knowledge now, a lot of our communities can be really hesitant because of that. You know, we've been so generous with showing where fresh water sources are from and trading knowledges. And in return, you know, we often received poor health outcomes, whether it was from those blankets or whether it's sugar addiction and alcohol and being exposed to more disease. So you can understand why there's a hesitance now in passing down that knowledge. And we know that when our communities are over consulted or asked too many questions and receive no positive result in return, that it can give a really tricky relationship to be able to build and bring back. Reciprocity is really important in these conversations. This is another picture from that burn up on Nukunu country. We need to uplift traditional wisdom and maintain correct ownership of knowledge. These very old knowledge systems aren't non-Indigenous people's knowledges to profit from. They are the knowledge of the community, and cultural intellectual property is just as important as the Western intellectual property. We need to make sure that we have protocols when we work with First Nations communities to make sure that this is done correctly and that our communities feel safe to be able to share wisdom and knowledge. Really important stuff. Inspiring future planning for country. And I think that this overlaps into every sector of what we do. Everything that we do as human beings affects country. We talked about that really broad way of looking at that before, the interrelationship of every living being and the spirituality and connectionship and relationship and reciprocity that it shares with everything else that lives. So to think about how that affects country is really important. Who are you planning for and why? And are you planning for accessibility and equity? Or are you planning for more exclusion and more privilege and more class systems that divide people further? A really important thing to be able to ask ourselves in business. These 12 boxes are really important to me. This is like 10 years of my work, my life's work, which when you put it on one slide, makes it feel quite disappointing, but this all behind these little boxes have lots and lots and lots of information behind them that are really, really important to understand. So respecting and recognizing the rights, law, LORE and LAW, the history and customs of the First Nations communities or community that you're working with is really important. And that's as simple as asking questions of the First Nations people that you are working with and making sure that you're doing things in the right way. There's so much data, there's so much knowledge, there's so much generosity of sharing and reciprocity of information with First Nations knowledges. Before you go and ask someone face to face, have a quick Google like you would anything else and see what you can find, and then fact check and double check. Lots of books, lots of amazing First Nations authors, lots of education pieces that are coming out, two-way science, which is Aboriginal traditional science with Western science. They're the same legitimacy. Our old people basically have PhDs of their own right without the paper behind them. So really important that we recognise that and how important our knowledge systems are there. Building and fostering meaningful relationships. This sort of engagement with First Nations communities to overcome the climate injustice, to be able to bring everyone on board, is really important. We need that reciprocity. Things take lots of time. Often our boards or our First Nations communities will get papers asking for someone to sign something off of a project that may have been worked on for 6 months, and we get given a week to be able to look at it ourselves. We have so much diversity within our different communities, and we require time to be able to understand projects. It's also really important in that meaningful relationships, that early consultation is something that's considered as well. Dadiri is one that's really important, deep listening, and that is multifaceted. Deep listening to yourself and your connection to country and your connection to nature. Dadiri to the questions or the, I guess, internal inquiries that we can have around decolonising our thoughts, around working better to create more justice for everyone, to get rid of these barriers that we have. We know that these inequalities are already being faced, and we know that we don't have to leave everyone behind. We don't have to have marginalised communities being affected worse. We can make sure that our communities are listened to and that their solutions are put first and foremost as being the most vulnerable communities in these conversations. The integration of knowledge systems, which I think we touched on before, with permission only. So the native food business in Australia of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional foods and the way that that's profited off is less than 5% of those businesses are owned by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and people. So that's a massive shame job. That means that a lot of people have been grabbing and extracting knowledges and taking it to make a profit off themselves, which is pretty disappointing. Again, another reason that it makes it hard to have that meaningful relationship building when our communities have been burnt in that way before. Knowledge ownership, remuneration, so paying people for their time, that makes heaps of sense. We need to get by and pay rent and bills and put food on the table, and our knowledge needs to be understood that it's of value. So remunerating people for their time is really important, and that aspect again of cultural intellectual property. We talk about capacity building. A lot of the projects that come in the climate space are short-lived. They don't last for a really long time. They're kind of like little tidbits that might be 2 years of funding, and it makes it really hard to capacity build for future scoping to be able to have a sustainable and equitable environment long term. Capacity building is not just employment, it's education and long-term training. And in this space, we know that less than 1% of our leadership in Australia, of our leadership positions, are by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that's not because we don't have people who are able to be leaders. That is because we don't have the same opportunities to lead and have our skill sets expanded and have that nurturing support to be able to move up within companies. Often our communities are offered low-level traineeships, and we hop between those short two-lived 2-year projects without being able to expand and excel in our careers to be able to move up and have higher management positions. So capacity building is being able to increase the capacity of the knowledge systems of our people to be able to lead and manage and have self-determination. Self-determination is important for me because throughout the referendum, which obviously failed last year, self-determination was a massive topic about let's have First Nations self-determination. This is really important. Our First Nations communities have always been self-determined. We've always been self-determined people with our own ways of trading, of surviving, of learning, of passing down knowledge, of law, of rules and governance. All of these things we have had self-determination before. Our self-determination got taken away from us, and now we need to self-determine our communities. We have these knowledges still within our communities. We just need the freedom and the capacity building to uplift our knowledges to be able to be self-determined again. We've got to revitalise culture. That's been something that colonisation has really screwed up for us, and a huge part of cultural revitalisation is the healing of people back to land, back to country, the healing of country together. And in cultural revitalisation, if you're someone who lives in Australia, cultural revitalisation is an important part of your responsibility by living here. Whether you're First Nations or not, you live on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and it's important to really know and understand the knowledge and the deep history of this place. If you went to another country, you would really embrace yourself in the culture of that place. You would go and maybe see some museums and try some authentic First Nations foods and get really excited about language. We need to have that same responsibility to this country here, and to be able to revitalise our culture and be really proud of the fact that Australia is a really diverse country with so many different First Nations communities, over 250 different communities and over 600 different dialects of language. Our art is vibrant and diverse, our culture is diverse, our history is deep and long-standing. We need long-term collaboration and commitment in these projects so that we can look after country we look after 7 generations ahead and 7 generations behind is our thinking process. And we need to be able to expand that into different businesses and ways of thinking, knowing and being and doing. Empowering First Nations economies, looking at First Nations owned businesses, making sure that they're actually First Nations owned, not that they've just got a dot painting as the logo. That one might catch you out. You can look at Supply Nation or email the place to make sure that you're empowering the right business to be able to uplift our economies and get our communities over the poverty line. Learning and adopting appropriate customs as law as guided. Acknowledgement of country is a really obvious one of those that comes straight to mind for me. It's a really old practice, acknowledgement of country. When we used to cross into one another's lands, we would acknowledge that we were in someone else's country, and we would be welcomed to that country by the traditional owner of the person that's there. So doing an acknowledgement of country is actually revitalizing culture, which was another point that we talked about being really important before. Another part of that might potentially be holding a minute of silence for the people that we have lost. Lots of different things. It's just about talking to the First Nations communities that you're working with and understanding what are the appropriate customs and law that we need to adopt working together, and how can we help do that. We talked about leadership, super important. We need our communities leading for themselves, and we have an amazing plethora of skills and people ready to go to do that. The policy that exists behind a lot of Australian law and governance often cuts us out from being able to lead and manage. So we need to implement policy and institutional reform to be able to make these deep changes into long-lasting decision-making. For almost 240 years, we've been cut out of the management of our own country, once nurtured for thousands of years as an intelligent, regenerative system. How many more years will we watch this country roar up in flames while human-made poisons and pollution choke our water, air and soil before we integrate these knowledge systems together and uplift First Nations leadership? Since colonisation, we have lacked seats at the table, and it's been screwing up every aspect of First Nations people's lives as we know it. So the only thing that we've lacked so far is being able to sit beside one another and have a voice. So give us a voice. The onus is on each and every one of us to create a better future for all, leaving no one behind. Thanks so much for listening. I have my really super lame LinkedIn QR code here if you'd like to connect and chat further. And definitely open for questions. I'll exit out of this slideshow in just a sec. But thanks so much for joining me. And yeah, definitely keen to answer anything that you have. I hope that gave a good framing. I think sometimes we forget when we're in this sector how much division there is in this equity space, how many people are on the front lines and how many people get left behind. So I really wanted to make sure that that messaging was strong. And if you've got more questions, there's really fantastic projects going on country that change this now. But I wanted to sort of put the question out there on how we can do this individual action ourselves. So please ask any questions.
Thanks so much, Tiahni. And yeah, such important reminders, I think, yeah, like you said, and just stopping and reflecting on, yeah, the true realities of people that we may not always be face to face with, and that you might see on the screen from far away and that kind of thing, and then how that relates to, yeah, to the work that we do. And as you so beautifully articulate, just all that everything is all integrated with each other, and we're so wonderful at trying to pull that apart with our Western ways of thinking, and that's been so detrimental. And yeah, as you were speaking, just all of the words that you were using again, and that stood out to me from lots of people in terms, that self-determination, the revitalization. There's so much work to be done within all of our communities around that reconnection with ourselves and with country. And yeah, love the idea about us being country ourselves as well. So we can't separate. It's not possible. So thank you so much, yeah, for all of those all of those reminders. We actually don't have heaps of questions in the chat, but if you would like to add any chats in, please do. As I was thinking through a few of the organisations that you picked out in terms of encouraging people to provide funding for and that kind of thing, is there any way with particularly around seeds, I think, and young leaders, is there a way that people can donate or contribute, you know, if they're over the age of 35 like me, to support seeds as well, beyond encouraging young people to join and be a part of that movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can donate. I can chuck a link in there and put it out in the email that comes afterwards. You can donate to support the projects. The funding from Seed is diverse, so it goes towards training young people on country about climate science and about all of this stuff, how we can support our young people to be climate leaders and have seats at the table and be part of these conversations. It also supports people like in the training and development, but it also supports us to go and speak to elders on country and directly fight against the fossil fuel industry. So the Stop Adani project was a massive one that Seed and AYCC worked on for a really long time, campaigning against, and that ended up being successful. I think it took 8 years to get Adani to pull out. And funnily enough, another mining company just picked that up straight away, which seems to be the way. We're working against a mega fracker at the moment from Germany who's trying to come across to the NT. So lots of cool things that we're doing in the space there. That all that funding really helps to support. We can't do it without donors, so that's really helpful.
And just that importance of having, that long-term funding that you were talking about, because these campaigns and fights are not just for 12 months or 2 years, they're like 8 to 10 years to, generations as well. So, particularly I think as, Nat's just put in as well, I get so overwhelmed when it comes to tackling climate changes. I think a lot of people do, and you were alluded to that. What do you feel are the top things that we need to be doing as individual or groups and organisations? I mean, I think you did that. You kind of summarised that really well with all those different options in that slide with all your boxes. But and maybe things that you've done that help you feel less overwhelmed as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I think community building is really integral in this space, and there's lots of people that work in the nature education space here. I spoke about the climate despair that our young people are coming up against, and also that all adults, especially in the space, you kind of go between being like, cool, we're doing good stuff and this is really helpful, and then being like, is this even making a difference? Is anyone listening?
Correct.
Am I talking to the converted all the time? I feel your pain. I think the big one for me, divesting my money, so my super and my banking, away from fossil fuel companies. I was really surprised when I went onto Market Forces at the sheer number of companies that still support unethical things, and companies that kind of looked like they were kind of green, turned out they were just greenwashing it. They were still supporting really bad projects for country. So that's made me feel quite helpful in the fact that I know that my money isn't being invested into those projects. Yeah, the community building, SAGE was built here in South Australia, South Australian Grassroots Ecosystems. They recently won an award at the SA Environment Awards, which is really exciting. Being able to uplift one another and be around like-minded people is really great. I'm in the methane mitigation space as my full-time job. We reduce livestock emissions by feeding seaweed to cows, and it reduces their burps and farts, which they each emit 100 to 120 kilos of methane per cow per year, and our seaweed reduces that by 90%. But your green waste, all of your green bin contents, if you put that into landfill, emits heaps of methane. So cannot stress the importance of dividing your waste out properly. The community building and orgs of being able to have regular donations to places that are doing really good pre-existing work already is really important, to be able to put your money into those areas. But getting out into nature is my biggest thing that makes me feel really connected to myself and to country, to pre-existing areas, to know that we have all of this biodiversity to protect where it already exists, and that we need to regenerate and rewild and bring back greener spaces into the places that aren't there. So being able to sit on country and walk around and feel that connection is really important.
Great. Awesome. I've got one question in the Q&A. Someone just messaged also to say that the chat function isn't working for them. So sorry if you've been trying and ask us a question. Maybe try and use the Q&A function. I've got one in here from Ruben, who, and we've got lots of thank yous. So the chat function is working for some people. So just do you, it's an interesting question, Ruben, in terms of like, a lot of things you mentioned around climate change. I think Ruben's interested in terms of groups or actions that are out there specifically working more around those climate justice elements and improving equity and solutions and access rather than the technical solutions themselves. I know that you've mentioned a few groups, but if you've got any others, or we can follow this question up with the follow-up email as well. But yeah, it's a really good distinction, I think. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to send a bunch of links in the follow-up email if that's cool, because then I can send a bunch together. And, you know, there's so many groups doing amazing things. And I think a really important part in hope and in active resilience is we need to talk between sectors better. We need to have better cross-communication and dialogue. And there's so many different groups doing different things. So bear with me and I can put something together to email out. That would be really great.
Yeah, definitely great. And someone's interested a little bit around the benefits of cool burning, a super practical question. Yeah,
absolutely. So I can definitely link in stuff to Fire Sticks and the wonderful crew who are doing that work on Ghana country as well. Cool burning is the coolest thing ever, I think.
Yes.
It's a really, really old cultural practice where we know that a lot of the Australian flora or Australian plant life requires fire to be able to regenerate, and it will be a certain temperature that plants need to be able to open their seeds and lots of different things to be able to pollinate or grow into different plants. The aspect of managing country and invasive species and weed management is really important with fire. When gums drop branches and leaves, the ground cover gets suffocated by a lot of old vegetation that comes matted down. And there's lots of different ways that cool burning helps to get rid of all of that suffocation and is able to provide more oxygenation to roots of different plants. There are lots of different cool things that come from cool burning. It's also cool enough that that animals can walk away, plants, bless, sorry about that, can walk away safely without being burnt. So it's unlike a prescribed burn, which is really, really hot. It doesn't damage animals and plants to that extent. We know that orchids are able to come back. So people who are worried about burning with orchids, they still are able to keep their root system. The mycorrhizae and the fungi in the soil aren't harmed by the cool burning. And it's just this brilliant way of being able to regenerate flora, as well as reducing the amount of old dead plant matter that's on there. So we are able to like scrape and move vegetation out, as well as being able to get that. And it's really, really low emissions being able to burn this old vegetation out. So yeah, really cool stuff. I'm pretty obsessed with it. I think it's great.
Yes, great summary. And who was it that asked that question? Clarissa, if you do want to jump into a bit more, we actually had the Fire Sticks team do one of these presentations last year or earlier this year with Clem Newchurch and Quiley Newchurch, and they did there's some awesome slides and pictures of them showing the cool burning technique and then how quickly things are revitalized as well. It's just that was quite an amazing presentation to be a part of, because they're learning those practices as they go as well, and I think over time more and more community will get invited along to be a part of those things and to learn from them. But it's just been amazing to champion them from the sidelines and see them become so passionate about their skills and their practices and how that has worked within the community. And they hosted a national women's Fire Sticks conference here in Adelaide, and so it's just, yeah, it's a very exciting part of this picture. So yeah, thanks for pulling that in. There's been a great example of active transport as a really good practical way for people to jump into this space. So thank you, Andrea, for that link. And yeah, Nat's just shared the Ghana Cuddler, Ghana Fire session link in there for people that might want to jump into it straight away and see what I'm talking about. But I think I'll just jump back in. Look like there might be one more on I'm toggling between two different sessions now. Yeah, just lots of thank yous. Will the cool burning be extended to other areas in South Australia? I think it already is, isn't it? And you were out in different countries and different parts. So yeah,
super exciting. And the Fire Sticks team are just like, such an incredible group of people. This element of bringing back this cultural revitalization, like healing country, also healing people. And Kwali and Clem speak about this a lot, the way that the healing of ourselves comes from healing country. And I think that's so important in the space of, not having a hierarchical understanding of the world, but knowing that we inherently have better health outcomes and better results as humans when we look after country ourselves. And that sense of mental well-being and mental wellness that comes from that is really, really important. So yeah, it's really exciting to get involved in lifting people up. It's been interesting in the last few years, people have started calling me an equity specialist, which I think is hilarious because I think it makes a lot of sense to try not to leave anyone behind. And it's really nice to sort of, rather than the question of, we need to ask ourselves the question of, are we including everyone, but also are we accidentally leaving people out by the decisions that we make, and sort of checking in with that is really important. So it's a really cool space to be in, and I'm really excited that so many people are understanding the sheer amount of potential in traditional land management and knowledge, and that this knowledge system is so old, and we've been prevented from being able to revitalize and practice our culture. And now's the time to be able to uplift this wisdom and bring it into the space and change the world for everyone for the better. So I'm really excited.
It's truly exciting. And yeah, Fire Sticks is another one of those organisations that you can donate. And I know that they're putting out an end of financial year call at the moment as well. So if you want to jump in and support that way where you can, that's another great link. So yeah, we're at time. So thank you so much, Tiahni, for today, and for all your reminders of the work that we all need to be doing to revitalise and lift up culture, and also to ask those hard questions. I think you were mentioning that at the start in terms of how much we're actually still colonised in our thinking and our practices. And I think that that's a really good challenge for all of us that are online, and how we do that, I suppose, collectively, and having these having some more honest conversations about our work and what we need to actually stop doing, and rather than all the progress and the action all the time, is actually how we do it. How are we actually responding in a way that's just and equitable? So thank you for reminding us of that. But yes, we will send out to everybody a follow-up email with lots of those relevant links that you can keep exploring in your own time. Our next session is coming up on the Thursday, the 18th of July, and this one's going to be around water, smart homes and neighbourhoods with Belinda Doring from Water Sensitive SA, who are an organisation that Green Adelaide have the pleasure of supporting. So please jump into that next one. I'm sure most of you are on our mailing list now, but if you're not, you can join that as well. We'll send you more information about that session, and you can watch all the previous sessions online as well. So winter is a great time to do that when you might not be able to get outside as much. So thank you so much, and thanks for all the, lots of great feedback, and thank you feedback coming through in the chat. So enjoy your afternoon, everyone, and please let's keep this conversation and these connections happening offline and face-to-face around campfires everywhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you.